process. The contact information has been circulated to you. Members of the public can view the proceedings via the live stream and YouTube link, which will be tweeted out at Van City Clerk. Video of committee meetings, speaking, presentations, amendments, and vote results will be projected to viewers when available. Committee members are reminded to please enable their video to ensure quorum is maintained during the meeting under Section 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw if attending virtually. The external members of the committee can access the speaking queue by clicking the raise hand icon on WebEx or raise your hand physically. In case of an emergency where we would need to evacuate the building, I'd like to direct your attention to the exits. There are 2 exits beyond the glass door and to the left. If the glass doors are obstructed, please direct your attention to the 4 exits in the chamber. Please use the stairs, do not use the elevator, and I'd also like to highlight that there is a defibrillator located at the end of the hallway outside of the council chamber. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and we thank them for having cared for this land, and we look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato is absent today for civic business. Councillor Fry is in the chair. And Councillor Boyle. Present. Councillor Montague.
Present.
Councillor Jo.
Present.
Archie Johnson, external representative.
Present.
And Sophia Choi, external representative. Present. And Carol Bellringer, external representative. Present. The meeting has quorum, Chair Fry.
Thanks, Clerk. So just a couple of announcements before we begin. Any comments on the agenda item can be sent to the committee using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out at Van City Clerk. Also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders, and remind committee members that when addressing speakers and staff, will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. There is 1 report and 1 verbal update on today's agenda. I'd like to also welcome 2 staff from the Auditor General's office, Deputy Auditor General Lori Berndt and Audit Principal Jenny Lau. Also want to acknowledge that we have here in the chambers Carol Bellringer and Sophia Choi, our external liaison members. Thanks for joining us today. Finally, I'd like to remind committee members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the clerk in final written form before the committee members introduce them. Please ensure the clerk has received your amendment by emailing it directly to Tina Penny and Elise Stewart. Okay, first item, update on whistleblower policy, which I'm going to invite the Auditor General, Mike McDonnell, to introduce and present this item. Mike?
Thank you, Chair Fry, and good morning. Auditor General Committee members, thank you very much for being here. In February 2022, the Auditor General Committee requested that I prepare a study of whistleblowing practices in other jurisdictions that had an Auditor General or equivalent position. I presented this report 2 months later at the committee's meeting on April 22nd. The study noted significant differences between Vancouver's approach to whistleblowing and the approach taken in Ottawa, Toronto, and Calgary. As a result, the AGC made 2 recommendations to Council. First, that Council directs city staff to revise the whistleblower policy so that it addresses complaints coming from sources external to the city and report back to Council before the end of July 2022. And second, the AGC recommended that Council direct staff to revise the whistleblower policy so that the Auditor General be delegated responsibility for the intake, assessment, and investigation of complaints, making recommendations for corrective action and publicly reporting results, except for complaints involving elected officials, which were to be referred to the Integrity Commissioner. On June 21st, 2022, Council approved the Auditor General Committee's recommendations. Because the Auditor General Committee was the initiator of this work, today I'm circling back and providing you with a brief progress update. While I'm providing this update on my own, I've been working closely with Andrew Niklicki, the city's Chief Human Resources Officer. Unfortunately, Andrew was not available to be here today in person. Over the last 16 months, Andrew and I have been working together to update the whistleblower policy and, in addition, working with legal counsel on consequential amendments that were needed to be made to the Auditor General bylaw. While it's taken more time than I would have liked, nonetheless, I'm pleased to report that we've concluded our work. The revisions to the policy and the bylaw fulfill, in my view, Council's direction while respecting management's responsibilities and authority for staffing matters. Further, I've been told that the city will bring forward the updated whistleblower policy and the Auditor General bylaw at Council's next meeting on October 17th. I look forward to attending the next council meeting and seeing this work brought to its conclusion. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Mike. We do have questions. Councilor Kirby-Young.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you here in person. Just a couple of quick questions. I'm looking at the 2023 budget request relative to the 2024. And I see that the total request was, we started in, well, maybe I can reframe it. We started in 2022 as the office was ramping up at 1.6 million. 2023 is 2,005,000. And now we have this report at 2.4. So I wonder if you can just articulate the difference between where is the extra 400K approximately? I'm just doing some quick math going between the 2023 and the 2024 request. And I know you identified the whistleblower piece, but I'm looking for a little bit of perspective.
Councilor Kirby-Young, would it be okay if I maybe spoke to that on the next item? Because I will be doing a presentation with respect to the budget that hopefully will answer that question.
Okay, if I can just look for clarification. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to hold that. Can I ask on the whistleblower policy then in terms of, to your request, let me direct my question on that one. Thank you. In terms of, it's taken a bit longer than you would like, but what does this mean going forward effectively in terms of how the whistleblower function will work and how people can submit a concern if they have one, and how is that going to be handled in real terms for people?
Well, in real terms, the way it sits right now is if I receive a complaint as defined under the city's existing whistleblower policy, I'm obliged to forward that to the Human Resources Department. It's narrowly defined as being from staff, so it's sort of only half of the picture, if you will. And while I can do with information what I will, I'm obliged. It's non-discretionary. I have to provide that information to HR. In my view, that's not the right way. And I think it's a disincentive for people to report issues that potentially might be about the people that they're complaining about. And so what it will be is the complaints will come directly to my office. They will be triaged and assessed at that level. And then I'll determine the appropriate course of action, whether it constitutes a whistleblowing complaint as defined under the policy, and where the right place for the investigation to take place is, whether it's with my staff or whether it should be referred to the city, depending on the nature of the complaint. And then at the end of that, I'll be reporting back to city on an annual basis, to council on an annual basis on the annual whistleblowing activities. That's currently required under the policy, but to my knowledge, there never actually has been a report to council. So that's something that we will be doing. The effective handoff date will be January 1st, 2024. And really looking forward to seeing this move forward and bring the city up to the standard that other cities are following.
So if a member of staff has a complaint or concern they wish to bring forward, do they have full assurance in comfort and confidentiality in bringing that forward then, do you believe, with this approach
Absolutely,
model compared to-
confidentiality is protected under the policy and under the Auditor General bylaw.
Okay. And when you bring your report to council, will you, because I know you're assuming this responsibility under this office, but will you be able to provide sort of some context around what number of complaints we might be receiving relative to past years under the old practice, for example, and giving us a bit of a sense of how things may have shifted with the change?
I'll certainly be able to provide an update on our level of activity. As to what's been occurring in the past, I have limited insight into what's gone on to this date. But I think what will be meaningful is how the city's number of complaints compares to other similar sized municipalities. And then obviously we'll look for trends over time. It'll be an interesting source of information potentially feeding into my audit program as well.
Do you have access to those stats in terms of how many complaints each year? Have you asked for them? And is there any reason that you've?
I did when I
advised
did the
you can't?
study, but I haven't updated it since then. And the study showed that the city was about half the number, received about half the number of complaints that one would expect relative to the size and the population.
Okay, and presumably there could be different reasons for that, obviously.
Well, part of it is the narrow definition of what constitutes a whistleblowing complaint. It was defined just to a city staff as opposed to anyone else, a contractor or member of the public or what have you. And statistically, most other jurisdictions, it's about 50-50 between the two. So that would probably go a long way to explaining that.
Thanks, I think that's my time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young. I've added myself actually to the queue, seeing nobody else questions. Mike, I'm wondering if you could explain functionally how the whistleblowing would work come January 1st. What does an investigation look like, and how does it roll out?
Well, each one will be unique. It depends on the nature of the complaint and what it relates to, what department it relates to. There will be, I suspect, a number of complaints that perhaps don't fit what actually is defined as a whistleblowing complaint under the policy, in which case I would direct the individual to the appropriate place, which it could be a department in the city, it could be 311, it could be something I have to refer to the integrity commissioner if it relates to a member of council, or if it relates to me or the city manager, then that would go to legal counsel. Or it could be an external body. It could be the ombudsperson potentially, if depending on, again, the nature on the complaint. So we have that initial triage. Does this actually constitute, potentially, if it's true, a complaint under the whistleblowing policy? So then having made a determination and say that it is, then we would gather information from the complainant. Now, complaints can be made anonymously, so that could be a very difficult process if the individual hasn't provided contact information. We can only deal with then the information that we have at hand. But if the individual has provided contact information, then we will meet with them, gather further information, and then make a further assessment on how we proceed going forward and determine whether there's more information that might need to be gathered from the city, whether there's other people we would need to talk to. So each investigation is going to be quite unique depending on the individual nature.
And can we expect sort of a redacted report on exactly what kind of anonymous, in-person, whatever complaints came through?
The expectation is that there will be summary reporting. One of the things that we must be paramount in any good whistleblowing process is protecting the confidentiality and the anonymity of the complainant. And so anything that we report out would have to do that and bear that in mind first and foremost. But yes, there will be reporting back to council. I think I can confidently say that, on a quarterly basis, I can give you an update on the volume of complaints that are coming in. And of course, that very much speaks to the resources that we apply. As you know, we're a pretty small office. So if we have a huge volume of complaints, then we have a decision to make about reallocating resources or taking longer to get through the complaints than we might like. And if we have a smaller number, then we look at how we would reallocate resources.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Super helpful. Okay, seeing no other questions. Sorry, Carol. Yeah, please. Carol Bellringer.
Am I on? Thanks very much. Appreciating the change that will come with the new practices that you're going to put in place. But is there anything that you would currently be doing that you'd say is kind of similar? Like people approach you, and what do you do with those things now? And is it something you're able to deal with legally? I mean, in terms of, do you have permission to follow up things that come to your office directly? And then if so, what are you doing with those things now?
Well, if something were to come in that constitutes a whistleblowing complaint as defined in the policy, so that's serious wrongdoing and a complaint from a member of staff, the two key criteria, I am obliged to forward that to Andrew Niklicki, the Chief Human Resources Officer. It doesn't say I can't do anything with it myself, but It's non-discretionary. Now, I've only to date had one complaint come forward to me, and it was very quickly brought to the complainant's attention by the city, who was copied on it, that I was not the appropriate person to bring that complaint to. If it's from a member of the public, that's not currently defined as a whistleblowing complaint. So for me, that's just a tip.
So and partly what I was starting to think through was those things that are not technically a whistleblower complaint. They're tips, or you start noticing systemic patterns of, you get several people commenting on a particular issue, that kind of thing. So currently you would follow those up as they arise, but you're saying you're not getting much volume of that currently? And not, we'll probably start stirring that up by talking about this, and you'll get a flood after this.
If I can work backwards from that, yes, I agree with you. I anticipate that there will be probably a higher volume initially than we would see on a sustained basis, just because we intend to put out that it's there, it's available, and
Yeah,
people should
it's
avail
good.
themselves of it. But at the moment, yes, that's exactly what we do. I do have a member of staff who has experience in dealing with whistleblower complaints from a previous position. And this individual has been following up with people and following through to see, mostly to inform our audit program. Would this be something that
Mhm.
is of sufficient size and significance that we would want to perhaps look into the area?
Yeah.
Looking for patterns that are systemic, as you
Yeah,
mentioned.
yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Just a clarifying question, Mike. So if your office is taking responsibility for whistleblowing, is the report only going to council or will it come to this committee?
It's only to council. Well, be council through this committee. Actually, let me think that through. Pardon me, let me take that back. No, it'll be to council, but through this committee. Thanks, Sophia.
That you're
Absolutely.
talking
Yes,
about that will
that's correct.
finally start. Okay.
Great. Okay. Just checking the WebEx, seeing no further questions. Since this is an item for information only, there's no action required by the committee. So we can move on to our next item, which is the Office of the Auditor General 2024 budget request. And I'll now invite the Auditor General to introduce and present this item. Over to you, Mike.
Great. Thank you again, Chair Fry. Just a reminder for the process for council to review and approve my office's budget is described in the Auditor General bylaw, which requires me to present a budget request to this committee for review. This committee in turn is required to recommend an appropriation for council to consider. So accordingly, today I'm presenting a budget request with the recommendation that you endorse, and I hope you will approve. For the next slide, please, Elise. Not in there yet. There we go. Thank you. I'll start with a report on my office's projected expenditures for 2022 compared to the council-approved budget for the year. There have been modest savings against budget for salaries, training, and support costs, but most notably, there have been significant savings for contracted services. I'll speak to contracted services in the next slide because it represents a unique component of my budget that bears explanation. If I can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Engagement of appropriate subject matter expertise for each audit we conduct is required under Canadian audit standards, the framework my office follows in accordance with our operating license from CPA British Columbia. My budget request to you last year, I asked for an allowance to contract subject matter expertise to support my audit teams under the proviso that if the funds weren't needed, they wouldn't be spent. And I fulfilled that commitment to the tune of almost $100,000 this year. I asked for an allowance in this area because it's not possible to know the exact type of expertise my office will require or its cost. I employ a team of generalists, and so they bring that skill to the table, but they don't necessarily bring subject matter expertise in each area. There are two reasons for this also. First, that I have an audit program which indicates the topics I intend to look at, but the plan can, and indeed has, changed as priorities change. And second, even if my office's work schedule exactly followed the plan, the nature of expertise required in any individual audit isn't known until we determine the scope of work and understand the expertise required, as well as its cost. Along with professional audit standards we follow, applying appropriate subject matter expertise is the foundation on which the credibility of our work rests. I hope you'll continue to support this approach, since I know of no better way to conduct the work required to fulfill my mandate. Next, please. For 2024, I'm requesting a total budget of $2,412,000 to fund the operations of the Office of the Auditor General. While this represents an increase of $407,000 over the current year, it is in fact a steady state budget, which I'll explain in more detail. The year-over-year variance has two components: salaries for my team and support costs. Salaries and benefits comprise the largest component of costs by far, 85% of total expenditures. The budget includes a total increase of $367,000 in compensation-related costs comprised of two components. First, funding for the entire year for the two incremental staff that are currently being hired to support the whistleblower function, as approved by this committee last year through my 2023 budget request. And second, the cost of living and merit increases totaling $97,000, which is consistent with the adjustments budgeted for the city's included staff and all other departments. The budget includes an increase also of $48,000 for support costs. This increase is entirely attributable to annual licensing costs for audit and data analytics software, offset by $4,000 in administrative costs I've determined we don't need. Funds to acquire this software were approved in my 2022 budget. However, only now is the software being acquired and installed. Lastly, the budget includes a reduction in contracted services totaling $8,000. These savings relate to services I'd intended to complete under contract, things like desktop publishing, editing, and some training, but have since determined can be completed just as effectively and more economically by my team. These savings are somewhat offset by an allowance for inflation. Next slide, please. As in prior years, we've continued to occupy a city-owned building rather than pay market rent for separate accommodation. Any acquired furnishings have come from city storage, and we continue to use the city's human resources and information technology support functions rather than employing third parties, as could be justified by an office that operates independent of the city's administration. Or frankly, it's just cheaper that way. Training has largely been delivered in-house, though it's fair to say we're reaching the limit of what we can reasonably do ourselves. We've also found that we've been able to produce our own reports, formatted with adequate quality without the assistance of external contractors. They're not super pretty, but I think they get the job done. We've also invited the city's internal audit group to piggyback on the software platform that we're currently putting in place. This doesn't necessarily save my office any money, but it does represent a benefit to the city as a whole, reflecting what I like to call thinking like a taxpayer. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is a reminder about the value add that my team strives for. This table was copied from the mid-year report I presented to you in July, showing the estimated benefits the city stands to achieve from implementing my audit recommendations. At that point in time, we estimated a return of $2 for every dollar so far that have been invested in the office since day one, with a longer-term estimated return of about $45 million over 5 years. With the changes to building permit fees Council approved on Tuesday as a result of my audit recommendations, these figures will be quite a bit higher when they're revised and published in my annual report in January. While very much an estimate, nonetheless, this demonstrates the potential for significant benefit to the city over 5 years. In other words, the monies invested in my office to date have been well spent. And while this doesn't provide me with unlimited license to spend, I hope it suggests that my modest budget request is worthy of your support. So to close, this is my 2024 budget request, which has been included in the documents that you were provided in advance of the meeting. And I hope you'll support with the following resolution. Elise? That the Auditor General Committee endorse the Auditor General's 2024 budget request of $2,412,000 to fund the operations of the Office of the Auditor General for 2024, and further that the endorsement be recommended to Council for approval. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mike. And you do have questions, starting with Councilor Kirby-Young.
Sorry for jumping the gun earlier on that one. I need another coffee, but can I get staff, because I don't think council received a copy of this presentation ahead of time. So can I ask staff to go back to that slide that showed the savings? I think it was about the third to last one. That would be great. And I just want to, yeah,
Year 7, yeah.
that was it. Oh. Although we don't have it on the screen, so I can't see it. Okay, well, can we take a pause? Because
Sure.
I think it,
Let's
so that the
just,
public can see this too.
Yeah, let's just take a quick recess while we, ah, we'll,
There we go. No,
I think
one
it's
more.
the third to last.
That's the one.
Yep, there you go.
clerk, maybe just if also we can circulate that by email would be helpful, I suppose.
Great, thank you so much. So in looking at this one, I just wanted to parse into it because I was going to raise this point, and so I'm glad that you anticipated it. We had that discussion at council yesterday or the day before, but it was this week. And I think it was a fairly substantive number in terms of the under recovery. And the number that came forth during that discussion when I had asked the question of our CFO, when council had adopted sort of the alternate recommendation, the city staff originally suggested that we phase in an increase in permit fees to work towards assuring the full cost recovery, which was the model in which you had identified that we had left taxpayer money on the table and development was not funding development. And the number that the CFO gave on the record was about $20 million. So I'm just looking to align some of these, and with your comment around, given council's decision on Tuesday, that the savings will be higher. So can you walk us through these numbers a bit? Because I think this is a really important piece, because when we were advocating for the Office of the Auditor General and looked at the cities across the country that had put one in place over time, they had definitely shown their worth in terms of the savings to the taxpayer. And so I'd like to just really better understand these numbers you have here relative to what we discussed on Tuesday
Sure.
and your comment that these will be revised further.
Thank you for that. The underlying assumption in relation to the building, the permit fee cost recovery model, which is where most of the savings are coming from, was that it would probably take the city 5 years to phase in full cost recovery.
Okay.
What happened, of course, on Tuesday was that council voted to bite the bullet, do it in 1 year. So what that means is that the figures that we put here are understating what we anticipate the cost, the bottom line impact for the city would be. So rather than say in year 1 of almost 3 million, well, no, that's going to look more like 12. And every year thereafter, it's going to look more like 12 instead of incremental increases, which is what we had anticipated. It's an estimate. We didn't know how quickly, we hope, or if at all, if the city would implement my recommendations at all. Certainly it's that's what we hoped for, but this was this assumption clearly wasn't correct. And the recommendation was jumped on a lot faster than my team and I anticipated it would be, which I got to tell you is kind of gratifying.
Yeah, and I was happy to move that recommendation, but I guess my question explicitly is, how can this committee get an updated, either accurate or sort of in this year the savings will be, or updated projections back, so that we have clarity for the committee and on the public record of what that looks like?
Okay, I had intended doing that because this is reflects one of my office's performance measures in my annual report, which would come out in January. If the committee wanted something earlier, I can ask my team to put something together and I can have it to you in a couple of days.
I think that would be really helpful, and I think we do have a practice in council. Sometimes we will often ask staff for information back, and so look for guidance from the chair, but I think it's completely in line. Often we ask for information, we get a memo back, for example, from the city manager. I don't see why we couldn't do the same from the Auditor General to get some updated information. Chair, versus waiting for a January update.
We want to handle that informally, or would you like to?
I'm happy to informally, unless you provide any guidance otherwise.
Informally should be fine then. I think we've got, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that would be great. And then the last question I have is, because that's a really significant piece for the public to see the value that's being generated by the office. And then the last question I have is on the whistleblower. Why do we need two staff to do that off the bat versus, say, for example, having one and figuring out what the volume looked like if we don't necessarily know how that's going to go?
Quite frankly, I just didn't want to interrupt the audit program that we currently have going. If we get the volume that I think is going to come, then it's going to put some of our work back, stuff that we're doing with the police department, for instance, and work we're doing with the city's leases. And I just didn't want to interrupt my program.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councilor Kirby-Young. Councilor Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mike, for this presentation. A couple of clarifying questions. So, contract service, $239,000. I saw the number breakdown: 70% have a subject matter expert, 17% for QA, and 11% for legal. That's 98%. Where the other 2% go?
Goodness, that's a good question. I could just be rounding, Council.
Just rounding, okay.
I would have to dig into that to find the 2%. It's minor things. So we do have some contracted services for instance, we had someone come in and help with the transition for our administrative staff. So it's miscellaneous little things.
Okay, so it's not renting, it's some miscellaneous cost. Okay. Yeah. The other question, similar as Councilor Kirby-Young's question regarding the whistleblower. So that's two full-time employee, or how does that work? Or that's multiple people for the two FTE?
Well, it's 2 FTEs with the expectation that where things are super busy, we'll bring people in from the other audits. And if
Okay.
whistleblowing is quiet, then they'd be available to assist the audit teams.
So they might be working on a part-time basis, if I understand correctly, if they are not that busy.
They might be working?
Working on a part-time basis.
Or they could be working at 120. I don't know.
Okay. So, and that cost including salary, benefit, everything?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And also the cost of living increased compared to last year, $97,000. I guess that's all the salary increase adjusted by inflation, right?
That's correct. And
Okay.
all of my staff are in the middle of the bands because they're new employees to the city or new in their positions.
Okay.
And so that's consistent with the increases that would be employed for any other excluded staff person in the city.
I see. Thank you. And one more clarifying question for the contract service. I guess that's all external. We don't pay anything. Like if you conduct interview with internal staff, we don't pay them, right?
Oh, no, that's correct. This is
Only the external.
subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
So that's quality review. It could be, right now we're conducting audits of the police department and parks, and we have subject matter experts who have backgrounds in both of those areas that none of my team does. And it's absolutely necessary for us to complete that work.
Okay, so then the other following up question is, when you select those external expert, what are the criteria? Like for instance, how can we make sure their perspective is very neutral instead of favor one particular group or not?
Yeah, it's that's a really good question. Thank you. And it's it really depends on the nature of the subject matter expertise.
Okay.
And sometimes we actually ask the departments that we're auditing if they have thoughts of people who might be valuable. And we also talk to other audit offices who do the same sort of work and ask if they've had any suggestions. And depending on the circumstances, it could also just be open tender, depending on the size of the dollar value involved as well.
And I guess council or this committee has no saying regarding which subject expert you pick, right?
We
It's
do
all
not
yours.
specifically identify
Okay.
the advisors that we bring on board. So in that sense, my audit opinion is my audit opinion, and it's up to me to fulfill those audit standards by
Right.
ensuring that I get the appropriate expertise to be applied in each audit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's on me. If I start naming people, then I'm essentially transferring that responsibility to a third party.
Yeah.
I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay, perfect. That's all my questions. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councilor Joe. Councilor Montague, I saw your hand up on the WebEx and I added you to the queue. Do you have questions?
I did, but it's been asked. Thanks, Chair.
Oh, okay, great. Then seeing no other questions on the queue or in the room, would somebody like to move a motion? Moved by Counselor Kirby-Young, seconded by Counselor Joe. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, okay, great. That passes and that concludes, passes unanimously, and that concludes item 2 on the agenda. Can we have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Counselor Joe, seconded by Counselor Kirby-Young. All in favor, say yay. Opposed, say nay. Motion carries unanimously. This meeting is adjourned, and our next scheduled Auditor General Committee meeting is on November 2nd, 2023 at 9:30 a.m. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for your support, everyone. Much appreciated.